Hi there, welcome to Peninsula Players Presents Peninsula Players Theater's History. And in our last interview, we talked about the 1948-49 season, and I'd like to introduce someone who was involved with the theater at that time, Ted Bird. Ted, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Oh, good. I'm so glad you're here. And Audie sends her love.
Ah,
Yeah. Let me tell you a little bit about Ted. He has been a leader in the advertising industry and was a founder and is a founder and director of Bird, Bonnet, and Stauderman, and advertising production consultants with offices all around the world. And over the years, he's taken a very active role in many organizations related to this work on committees and as a management trustee. Ted, I don't know how you've done it. You've done a lot of stuff. And I know that just talking about your work in that area would take up a whole slew of interviews. But of course, what brings Ted here today is his long history with Peninsula Players Theater. And as I mentioned, he started in 1948 and was with the Players for 4 seasons at that time. That right? Four
no,
seasons?
no, I was much more than that.
Oh, yeah. Okay. We'll talk about that. And he made many friends and connections there and visited the theater often in subsequent years. Ted was on the board of Peninsula Players Theater from 1993 to 2011, during which the new theater was built. And he is currently on our National Advisory Council. So, in 1948, Ted, you were there. So tell us about how you got connected to the theater.
Okay, and in 1948, I was a freshman in the drama department at the University of Oklahoma,
Hmm.
and there was a Theater Arts magazine, which we haven't seen in a few years, but it was the only theatrical magazine available then. And there was an advertisement in it for a lighting technician in Fish Creek, Wisconsin. And I answered the ad because being a lighting technician, that was my specialty and my primary interest. The very fact rung all kinds of bells. Well, my application was accepted by
Uh-huh.
Caroline, I think, and I started an adventure going to Fish Creek.
Yes.
I took the train to Chicago. When I arrived in Chicago, I found out that the train station for the other train that went up the west side of Lake Michigan was across downtown Chicago. So I had to walk across and find the other station. And I
Hmm.
got on the train for, I think, up at the north end. I can't remember the name of the town now, but as far as you could go before you had to change to a bus. And then I got on the bus, which took you up into Door County.
I
So I
see.
arrived at the famous uh, intersection of Route whatever it is out there.
42, yeah.
Yeah, and there was nothing there except last year's billboard, which was falling down, and all the paper on it had peeled off and was laying on the ground, and it was a really desperate looking place. And I arrived, and thank God Casey Bragdon was there.
Uh-huh.
He met the bus in the oldest Ford I think probably there was in Door County at that point, and she drove me down the hill, and I met the rest of the company was there then, and I fell in love with the place, and I've been in love with it ever since.
So what was your impression when you got down to the bottom of the hill of the place?
Well, it's interesting because I'd never seen anything like it in my life, and the fact that the audience sat outside, I had a little trouble coming to grips with. But in '48, the canvas canopy had been installed.
Right.
I'm not sure. I think it got installed the year before, so at least they didn't get rained on. But one of the big problems of technicians was when it rained, you had to deal with a runoff, and it was back by the booth in the back of the theater, and it was and because the canvas canopy was so big, the amount of water that came down with rain was extraordinary, and that had to be dealt with, and all you could do
Right.
was hopefully you could route it outside the audience area anyway.
I heard stories from patrons back then who said they helped poke the canopy so that the rain would run off and it wouldn't collapse. And also, Audie mentioned that she heard stories about when there was a lot of rain, it would collect at the front of the audience, and they had to bail that out sometimes with buckets.
I've heard that story, but it never happened while I was there.
I see.
Maybe
I see.
because we did a better job on the back of the canvas. I don't know.
So Ted, when you said you had never seen anything like this place, what do you mean?
Well, I never seen a theater that looked like this. This was like a barn with a side cut out of it, and a
Right.
pavilion had been added, which is exactly what it was.
Yeah.
And being a lighting technician, when I got my first look backstage, and here were 8,000-watt dimmers screwed to the outside wall, no interlocking, of course. So when you did a master dim, all you could handle was 2 plates at once, unless you could draft somebody else to handle another handle or two. So we designed the lighting so that you didn't have to have a gentle fade out to black by everything. Well, and we'll get to that a little later, but that was a later adventure. But that's what I inherited. And
I see. So you got there, and where did you live while you were there when you got there?
dormitory,
The In the old dorm.
old dormitory. Yeah, I shared room with Jim McKenzie.
And that's where you first met Jim?
Yeah.
Oh, I see. So Helen Casey Bragdon took you from the bus to the theater. And then do you remember the first person you met when you got down there?
Caroline, probably, but I don't remember exactly. But it was either Caroline or Richie, and Casey and Mama Fisher, who was in the kitchen, and whoever else had gotten there by that point, none of whom I knew.
Mm-hmm.
But there were 3 or 4 people, because it was really the beginning of the season, and people were accumulating from all parts of the country. So,
And what was your impression of Caroline?
but you fell in love with Caroline within the first 5 minutes, if you were a man, because she was probably the most electric lady I've ever met in my life. She was just extraordinary.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how to describe it, except you just felt an instant connection with her, and she seemed to feel an instant connection with you. And and she remained one of my best friends until she died
Oh,
many years later. But
and Richard.
well, Richard was a different sort of a person,
Mm-hmm.
very smart, very opinionated,
Yeah.
uh, an okay director. Leo was probably a better director, but Leo knew where his place was, and knew where to step and not to step.
I see. And
But it was kind of a joy working with Leo, because you knew what was expected and what we were going to do. With Richard, you're never quite sure, because it could change from act to act.
I see. And how did I mean, Caroline and Richard were brother and sister and started the theater, and how did they interact with each other?
Well, we didn't see much of that because they had different lives. Caroline was married to Rodian, who was a pilot on TWA, so he kept flying off all the time. And
Mm-hmm.
and then Richie occasionally flew off. So as a company member, you rarely met them together because they never worked together.
I
They all
gotcha.
had different parts in the pageant.
And then you met Mama Fisher and Papa Fisher.
Yeah, well, Mama Fisher ran the kitchen, and she served every meal to everybody, 3 meals a day. And by halfway through the season, if you'd put on a couple of pounds, Mama would tell you about it and cut back on your portions.
Did that happen to you?
Yes, it did. And it happened to everybody, but she was
Yeah.
very attentive to everybody, and that was kind of wonderful. Now, Papa Fisher was an engineer, and I had something of an engineering background, and we talked the same language. And I think much of the wiring that had been done backstage probably had been done at his either he had done it or had been done at his direction, which was one of the major problems because none of it was by industry standards. So it was all with what you had when you had no money.
Gotcha.
Anyway, so.
And you met, I don't think Margot was there that your first year,
No.
right? But you met her later.
Oh, yeah. But that's where I met Jim McKenzie, who became one of my friends for the rest of his life. It was interesting. If you remember the old theater building,
Yes.
I worked stage right, Jim worked stage left. That's because all the dimmers were on stage right, and the curtain was on, the rope for it was on stage right. So I handled lights and the curtain. Jim was on stage left, and he handled the sound, and he got all the actors there because behind him was the ramp to the outside, which you remember.
Right, right.
That's where everybody came in. So he got all the actors in the right place at the right time. So
and so when you say Jim handled the sound, what was that?
we always played opera before the performance. And if there were sound effects during the show, which there frequently were, Jim handled that from that position.
And would he do that? Would that be recorded sound, or would he produce it himself?
It was almost always recorded.
Oh, I see. Oh, wow. And so while you were working at the Players, I know that you had more than one job there. You said you did some lighting.
I ran the canteen.
Oh, you did?
I ran the canteen, yes. Which meant I had to do all the ordering and putting the stuff on a shelf when it came in and closing up the canteen after the show was over. So.
And probably taking care of any mice that came through.
We didn't have any mice, thank heaven. But
oh, really? Wow.
Yeah, at least that I ever saw.
And you also, in that first season, you did some acting.
No.
No?
I never acted on that stage except I think once where I was a non-speaking role in a crowd scene or something.
Not your cup of tea?
Not my cup of tea.
So you were an extra body up there.
Yeah.
So tell us, what was a typical day like during that season?
Well, interesting. Everybody had breakfast, well, at least most everybody had breakfast. Certainly those of us working in the scene shop, because that was far more physical than what everybody else was doing. But we had breakfast in the lodge. Then you went to your particular, I think actors usually assemble at 9 o'clock, as I recall, about 9 o'clock. And that's about when we all started, about 9 o'clock. And you did whatever you had to do. The lunch was then at noon with a dinner bell that rang, and we all laid our stuff wherever we were and went into dinner, lunch. And then dinner, I think, was at 6 usually. Same rules. And then after the show, we all went back to the lodge for after theater drinks and whatever. Sometimes there were audience guests because the Fishers would invite old friends, old theater goers back after the show to have a drink with the company, that sort of thing. And that was kind of nice. We met a lot of interesting people who'd been watching shows there for years and years and years. So.
Yes. Was there at that time, was there a bonfire in the beer garden?
Always.
Always?
Always, yes.
Oh, nice. Nice. So there was a lot of socializing.
That was a tradition going when I got there, and I guess it hasn't changed in that.
No.
I hate to think of how many years since.
No, I know. And so the scene shop was there when you got there.
Yeah. The inadequate scene shop. Because the first show I worked on there, which was Idiot's Delight, had 16-foot scenery. Well, it's very hard to handle 16-foot scenery in that scene shop.
Yes.
But anyway, so it got painted on the set, but and there were no set changes for that show. But it was great fun because on that old stage, a set that was a 16-foot set, really looked terrific because it really
Yeah.
filled the proscenium and made you a part of something much bigger than you were.
So during that season you were there, there were a lot of shows. And how did the changeovers work between shows?
Well, we ran, and I hope I'm right, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and then we did. I may be off a day, and then we did Sunday, but the last show of the week, which I think was Sunday, and we struck after the show on Sunday and set the new set up, and you had your first dress rehearsal on Monday,
Uh-huh.
and you opened on Tuesday through Sunday, and then you did the same. We did it 10 times a season. Think of that.
I can't imagine.
Now, the last show in the first year, it may have been the second year, Richie wrote a musical or an interesting show to close the season.
Mm-hmm.
Because and it had lots of things in it, like, and Casey Bragdon was involved in writing it also.
Yes.
And between the two of them, they wrote what was a great fun show to work on. It was full of skits, lots of blackouts, lots of unexpected events happened, and the audience loved it, and so it got to be a yearly tradition that we closed the season with whatever we call these shows.
Right. I think they all had different titles. Yeah.
As the programs probably, but
So you were responsible for the lighting,
yes,
and and how many instruments did you have to
not
use?
many.
No.
The first border were a set of fixtures, clamp-on fixtures that you could buy in any hardware store, and there were like 15 of them on the first pipe.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the general lighting that you had. Then everything else was a special, and we didn't have very many of those, except the front lights were two. They were regular conventional spotlights. I'll think of the name of them in a minute.
Mm-hmm.
And the first thing I was able to do was change those to Licos, because with Licos you could cut out where they were spilling off the proscenium, and
Right.
you could hit the stage precisely. That was my first big, and man, that was a big adventure because Licos cost like $115 a piece.
Yikes. Yikes.
And that was not the kind of money that was easily available in those days.
Right. And
But
a lot of photos from shows at the time have lighting upstage also, backlighting.
well, not much. But we had a couple of second and third pipes that we occasionally hung lights on, depending on
Mm-hmm.
the needs of the show. But
Did Richard or Leo give you full reign as far as what you did?
Richard was the one. He gave me pretty well. He would always, if he had a comment, it was worth looking at, and he was usually right. But I think he recognized my talent, whatever it was, because it was all new to them, because they'd never had lights that worked like this or had done like this. I mean, for example, one of the shows we did in those early years was a show, and I can't remember who it, but it took place under one of the ramps underneath the George Washington Bridge or some master bridge. And so it was a curved top for the pylon of the bridge. And
Mm-hmm.
it was and that was one of my favorite lighting jobs, because I lit it with like two single instruments, and the shadows all fell exactly right, and everybody thought it was brilliant.
Well, that's one of the things in these interviews with Audie that has struck us both, is that Caroline and Richard were very interested in the artistry that they could bring to the players, in terms of scenic design, in terms of, like you said, your lighting.
When I got there, the scene designer was, I think I have her name, Frances McVeigh.
Mm-hmm.
He was a very traditional designer. And then some years later, Jimmy Moronic came, and Jimmy had an unlimited creativity, and he was a joy to work with, because whatever you needed, Jimmy could create.
Yeah.
He was a great painter, And it was great fun working with him because he challenged everybody, including himself.
And he still is
Yeah,
wonderful to work with. Yeah,
yeah.
yes. I'm hoping we get to chat with him later. So, you had mentioned that after the show you guys relaxed. Audie mentioned that was music played when you were after the show when you were relaxing.
Probably, but I have absolutely no memory of that at all.
Oh, okay. And
I'll tell you about Friday nights, though. Friday nights were adventure nights, and we frequently, as a company, went someplace on Friday night. And our favorite place was Schmidt's Gazebos over on the other side, and it was a wonderful restaurant bar uh, on a little peninsula of land, and it had been apparently built by the mafia from Chicago back in Prohibition days. And that's why it was kind of difficult to get to, because they could see everybody who turned in the driveway like a mile down the road. So for them, there were no surprises. But we loved it because George, who was the owner, well, we were very adventuresome, and we spent a fair amount of our money, on whatever. And one of the great adventures on the closing night of one season, and I don't remember which one, we went to George's for our last night, and we arrived, and George then closed the door and locked it and pulled down the shades, and then everything was on George.
wow.
And by that point, we had started drinking champagne, because champagne he would serve at $1 a glass. And in the kind of money we were making in those days, $1 a glass, which was, a little more than beer was, but was far more sophisticated than beer. So,
Wow, that's fun. Um, Talking about the a little bit about the grounds and the theater, how do you remember the audiences being? About how large were they?
well, in those early days, there were no public bathrooms like there are now. That building didn't exist. There was this device in the space between the lodge and where that canteen is now. That was It was, I think, forgive me, it was probably a six-holder device. Half were for ladies and half were for men. And it had to be pumped out, emptied out by a truck that came every 3 weeks or so and pumped everything out of it and hauled it away somewhere.
Wow,
But that was the only bathroom available to customers.
I see.
We had bathrooms in the lodge. We had a bathhouse, and of course the lodge had bathrooms, and the other end had bathrooms. But the audience was confined to this six-holder, which lasted until they built the what's there now.
Yes, yes, yeah. Life in the woods, huh?
Yes.
Now, Ted, for some time there was connected to the boathouse was the Wharf Theater, which I don't think was used as a theater the year you were there. But do you?
No, it was not ever used while I was there, and I was there, I think, until 1954, but I could be a year.
Yeah. Do you remember what happened to that building? Or
No,
new?
no, it was, the last I remember, it was still standing. It was not really usable anything because the floor wasn't level. One end of it had kind of sunk into the surface, and once in a great while, for some strange reason, there might be a rehearsal there.
I see.
If for some reason,
Did they? So where did they rehearse?
on stage
Usually
usually,
on
on
stage.
stage or in the lodge.
Oh, in the lodge. Yes. Um, and then and what? I'm assuming Richard took care of the gardens back then.
The gardens were totally Richard's passion and responsibility. Once in a while, he drafted somebody to help him a little bit, but none of us ever did that willingly.
I see.
Whatever you did in the garden at Richie's direction, he never liked
I see.
because he hadn't done it.
I say. Audie mentions some story that sometimes he would be working in the garden while he was directing a
Oh,
show.
absolutely, frequently, and how he did it, I'm not sure because he would be looking with his left eye at the garden, and the right eye would be on stage. And Leo, don't take two steps to your right, take one step to your left. You
I
are I mean, because he saw everything.
Uh-huh. And you just mentioned Leo Lucker, and you mentioned that you thought he was a better director than
Richie,
Richard. And
I think probably from the actor's point of view, because he was Leo was very precise. You know, he wanted you to move here for this reason, and with Richard, it was all kind of how you feel that takes you there, and then if he was happy with it, fine. If he wasn't happy with it, you did it 16 other ways before you
mhm.
got there. But totally different style.
How was it working with Leo? Because he was a leading man there for quite a while.
Well, many years, but when he directed a fair amount, if I had to guess, of the years I was there, he probably directed two, maybe three shows a year. That along with his lead and what was left. It depended on the shows, of course.
Hmm.
But if he had, he had a major part in show two, he didn't really have the time to direct show three.
Hmm.
But so
And what was he like as a person?
he was very interesting, very laid back, hard to describe. You never got through the outer skin to Leo.
Hmm. And you also mentioned Helen Casey Bragdon.
We never called her Helen. Casey was she was always Casey. She
Yeah,
she was a delight.
yeah.
She was a good actress. She always knew her lines, and whatever you needed, Casey could do.
Yes, and then and and you mentioned Jim McKenzie there, and you guys clicked from the beginning.
Well, Jim, I think came a year before I did. He
Oh,
was he was a great technician and loved the theater, and that was what made him. And he went on, as you may well know, he ran the Westport Playhouse until it was ended, which was many years ago.
yeah.
He did some major theater in San Francisco, the name of which I can't remember. Uh, he
ACT.
was, yeah, he was always involved his whole life in the theater, and he was very good at. Well, he was a good stage manager. He was not a great director, but he knew that, and so he rarely. I don't think I ever saw a show he directed.
He
Uh,
directed one show while I was there, a play called Far East by A.R. Gurney.
hmm.
Yeah. And I think Caroline and Rodian's kids were there while you were there.
Once in a while, the in later years, remind me what their names were.
Dunia and Heloise.
Yeah, they were there from time to time, but and they both would love to have been actresses, but they neither one had very much talent.
I see.
And so when they got used, it was usually, and I'm guessing, to please Richard and Caroline rather than what was best for the company, except they were cheap.
I see. And Jean Sincere was there also.
Oh yes, yeah. Oh, yeah,
And,
she was there in the very beginning. The first show, Idiot's Delight, she was in, along with Leo, and I think that's probably all the names you would remember. But Jean
I
was a joy to work with. Yeah,
yes,
you know,
I was
you know,
very happy to get to know her later on, and
yeah,
she's a very smart lady and a really wonderful actress.
and very, you couldn't help but love her.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yes. Um, Audia had also mentioned to me the mayor of Judville.
Oh, you mean Eva Klingbeil?
Yes. Yes, and she was involved with the players a little bit, yes?
Well, yes, but I don't, if she came other than closing night, I don't know. I mean, everybody, the people who lived in Door County knew her because she was always there. But every closing night, she came with her bottles of dandelion wine, which because she had the closing party at the Player after we struck the last show and put the theater to bed for the winter. Eva was always a part of that.
Oh, yeah. So did you do so closing night you also had to fold all those chairs in the audience?
The interns did that. I
Oh,
never
I
got
see.
involved with that.
Well, that happened until the new theater was built. Closing night, we had to pack all those chairs on the stage. Um, so in after you were at the Players for some seasons, what happened that prevented you from returning?
Uh, that's a good question. Let me think a minute.
I'm assuming you were starting work
Well, I was in
in.
New York. Well, I was in New York, and I got to after the season closed in 1950. My next move was straight to New York, and I'd never been east of the Mississippi River up until that time. And
Wow.
when I got to New York, I stayed with Leo Lucker for a couple of nights. But I guess no, I stayed originally with Caroline and Rhodian. They were in Westport, and then after a couple of weeks there, I came into the city, spent a couple of nights with Leo, and then I found a room on 52nd Street with a classmate from college,
Mm-hmm.
and I shared his apartment for a few weeks until I went to work at NBC around the corner. And that's a story where I walked into the personnel department of NBC television, which was right around the corner from my apartment in Rockefeller Center. And because I knew something about moving actors around a set, they were desperate for, because in 1950, television was only 3 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Videotape had not yet been invented. So the only choices were live or film.
Mm-hmm.
So when you finished a show on Wednesday night, Thursday morning, you started rehearsals for next week's show. And it was probably the hardest work I've ever done in my life, and I never had so much fun doing it because you went from colossus to colossus.
Yes.
Uh, one of my favorite stories was Perry Como. I worked that show. Perry Como could not remember more than 3 words together. So his whole set was surrounded by cue cards because he was singing a song that he'd sung 50 times. He couldn't remember the second line. So these were the things you got used to in live television.
Yes, and you were right there at the beginning when it was still an adventure.
Too.
Yeah. So, and you have stayed connected with the players your whole life. Um, what what were some of the things that you took away from working at the players? What did you learn or experience at the players that carried with you through the rest of your life?
Well, probably my relationship with people. I love people, and I love to see what makes them tick, and sometimes help them figure out what makes me tick. I haven't figured that out yet either. But uh, going to tell you a little story about, and this was in the early 50s.
Hmm.
Jim McKenzie, and as I said, Jim McKenzie was one of my best friends for the rest of our life, his life. Uh, he called me one summer, no, one winter. He had the Brattleboro, Vermont theater was going to be torn down, and they had a switchboard that they would give us. And now, remember, in Fish Creek, we had 8 single plate dimmers screwed to the wall, and you couldn't do a master dim because you didn't have enough hands.
Hmm.
So Jim and I drove to Brattleboro, Vermont, and disassembled the switchboard, and it was a 24 plate board with one master and 2 submasters. It was beyond our wildest dreams.
Oh,
Put it in a pickup and drove it to Fish Creek, where I
wow.
put it back together again. And the last time I was in the old building, it was still there because it went down stage right. And all of a sudden, we could do a master dim. We'd never been able to do that before in our life. And I had to change all the plugs because all the plugging had been done by Papa Fisher, with ordinary household stuff. And I had to go to stage plugs because that's the only way you could make all the, rental lights work, for example. So that was one of our great, and I don't know what Jim paid for that board, but I think we got it for free or very close to it.
I think Caroline could do that a lot also in Door County.
Yeah.
Ted, thank you so much for being with us today and sharing your memories and experiences at the Players, because it means a great deal to us, and we know that you love the theater a lot.
Me too. Yeah. I hope I'll see you this summer.
Indeed, I hope so too. So, well, take care, and we'll talk soon.
Okay, my friend. Thank
All
you.
right. Bye bye.
Bye bye.